Let's talk about the history of mass deportations in the United States, but more specifically, Operation Wetback from 1954. And no, I'm not being funny. That's literally what it was called by the government. Operation Wetback. As the United States entered into the Second World War, it was in great need of agricultural labor. In order to secure the much needed labor, though, they partnered with the country of Mexico. And what did Mexico want in return for cheap labor? Stricter border control. This manifested itself into the Bracero program, which let 4.6 million Mexicans cross the border legally. This legal, constant stream of Mexican American immigrants single handedly fueled most, if not all, the agricultural economy in California. This, although very, very successful for American economy, soon resulted in exploitation of Mexican labor. Because, of course, a country like the United States that runs on a foundation of capitalism always cuts corners when it comes to lower class workers. Through the Bracero program, Mexican immigrants were promised a minimum wage that American companies never provided from them. And with American economy now relying on the work of Mexican American immigrants, Mexico was really frustrated. The United States never held up their end of the deal and never made progress into controlling the border. On top of that, the United States still sought to discriminate against now legal Mexican American immigrants. And although many crossed the border legally through the Bracero program and gaining citizenship, there was a big hole in the system because although the United States had previously promised Mexico that they would provide strict guidelines for the working conditions of these newly emerging Mexican American immigrants, they never did, which meant a big, huge opportunity for American corporations to hire laborers that had little to no insurance onto how much they would be paid. This fueled even more previously established bigotry towards Mexican American immigrants. It lighted the sentiment that Mexican immigrants were taking American jobs, but instead it was jobs that Americans didn't want to take because of the low pay involved, and also the fact that Border Patrol was taking illegal Mexican immigrants from across the border and taking them directly to factories and cotton fields for them to be exploited for cheap labor themselves. The government also turned a blind eye to corporations hiring illegal immigrants because it benefited American economy. Mexico never got any of what they were promised during the deal. The United States had looser border control more than ever, and this was directly due to the exploitation of Mexican workers. And also, it was directly harming Mexican economy. The government of the United States was now directly managing a constant stream of knowingly illegal workers into the United States because it benefited them economically. And although this was a huge success for the nationalist economy of the United States, this was a really big harm to local farmers. Local farmers now could not compete with any corporations, which made the hate rhetoric towards Mexican immigrants even higher in lower to middle class American citizen communities. There was an almost paradoxical phenomenon to this whole thing. American citizens and even the American government praised the economic success of Mexican immigration, but had a huge distaste for the Mexican population as a whole. As the guidelines for the workplaces for these Mexican immigrants were never followed, including the 30-cent minimum wage that they were promised, their working conditions just became worse and worse. The Bracero program ended in 1964, only because of the pushback from religious organizations and labor unions that criticized the program for its promotion of unethical and abusive working conditions. Although all of this illegal immigration was directly because of the United States government, and that the United States government themselves were handling this illegal immigration for the exploitation of its workers, American citizens didn't know that, and the government surely didn't promote it either. So when the stream of immigration was slowed from the Bracero program, this birthed Operation Wetback. President Eisenhower had a huge distaste for the now booming population of both Mexican Americans and Mexican immigrants. And although the Bracero program had granted citizenship to legal workers, President Eisenhower aimed to deport all of the Mexican population, regardless of legal status. This process is called denaturalization, where a state will revoke citizenship against the citizens' wishes. This movement was spearheaded by Border Patrol officer Harlan B. Carter. Carter was a known racist against Latinos and a convicted murderer, as he had murdered a Latino as a teenager in 1931. Also meant that Operation Wetback would be performed with military tactics. The American government had started propelling anti-immigration and racist propaganda against Mexicans. Although the reason why Mexican immigrants were there in the first place were because of the American government. This helped fuel support for Operation Wetback, but also helped fuel discriminatory practices onto legal Mexican American citizens. Operation Wetback used violent and aggressive military tactics, but also racist racial profiling to help identify potential deportees even if they were legal. The number of deportees is actually drastically lower than the US initially reported, likely closer to 300,000. The big problem, though, however, as well, is that when the American government was capturing deportees, they would drop them off in the middle of nowhere, which caused 88 deaths of legal braceros. The truth is, the United States didn't care that the immigrants that they were deporting were legal United States citizens. They had gotten direct permission from the United States government to be there. But because of the new hate rhetoric against Mexican American immigrants, they all had to go. That's the danger of mass deportation, and we've seen it time and time again. Mass deportation is one of the biggest topics brought into conversation within the rise of fascism. Because mass deportation doesn't aim to actually deport a small group of people. Mass deportation is almost always based on racial prejudices, and these racial prejudices do not discriminate on your legal status. Just ask the Jewish victims of the Holocaust, for example. And it's honestly no surprise that the pushback against this mass deportation, now emerging again because of conversations around Trump's administration, isn't really being pushed back from Mexican American citizens, is because it was never really pushed back from American citizens in Operation Wetback either. They soon regretted this though, because when Operation Wetback started coming to its peak, its violent tactics started disrupting Mexican American communities. It started disrupting Mexican American businesses and also dismantling Mexican American neighborhoods. Operation Wetback was extremely unethical and it was one of the biggest mass deportation events in the United States. The state of California has now since apologized in 2012 for deporting hundreds and thousands of United States citizens illegally. Can we look at any pushback for mass deportation attitudes in Trump's administration? Of course we can. For this, we can actually point directly to J.D. Vance. Because economically, mass deportation has a huge hit on American economy. Because historians and economists for years have said that anti-immigration sentiments, but more specifically mass deportation, puts a huge dent into the American economy, but specifically to American taxpayers. Because the financial efforts for mass deportation have to be extremely high for an operation like that to be successful. In a now deleted blog post by J.D. Vance, he states, quote, "A significant part of Republican immigration policy centers on the possibility of deporting 12 million people or self-deporting them," Vance wrote, quote, "Think about it. We conservatives rightly mistrust the government to efficiently administer business loans and regulate our food supply. Yet we allegedly believe that it can deport millions of unregistered aliens. The notion fails to pass the laugh test. The same can be said for too much of the party's platform," referring to the Republican Party. Coincidentally, though, this blog was quickly deleted right before he ran for the GOP. Surely the Republican Party could never be extreme enough to adopt the attitudes of Operation Wetback, right? Well, Donald Trump has actually referenced President Eisenhower numerous times, but specifically Operation Wetback in 2015, quoting, "You look back in the 1950s, you look back at the Eisenhower administration, take a look at what they did, and it worked." Unfortunately, the mass deportations of legal Latinos in the United States is extreme, but it's not something that hasn't been done. And that's the power of fascism. It gives you a sense of pride and patriotism that you could never be the next victim. As long as you shake hands with the system and do everything correctly, that none of this will affect you. But the ultimate goal of fascism, and specifically white nationalism, isn't to get rid of some. It's to eventually get rid of all. And I promise you, you're not the chosen one just because you abided by their rules.